Hello and welcome back to my blog. We're on to part 11, The Creative Process in the Individual by T. Troward, Chapter 5, Part 2, The Personal Factor. Now we have seen that the creating spirit necessarily possesses the powers of initiative and selection. These we may call its active properties, the summing up of what it does. But what any power does depends on what it is, for the simple reason that it cannot give out what it does not contain. Therefore, at the back of the initiative and selective power of the Spirit, we must find what the Spirit is, namely, what are its substantive properties. To begin with, it must be life. Then, because it is life, it must be love. Because, as the undifferentiated principle of life, it cannot do otherwise than tend to the fuller development of life in each individual, and the pure motive of giving greater enjoyment of life is love. Then, because it is life guided by love, it must also be light, that is to say, the primary, all-inclusive perception of boundless manifestations yet to be. Then from this proceeds power, because there is no opposing force at the level of pure spirit, and therefore life urged forward by love, or the desire for recognition, and by light, or the pure perception of the law of infinite possibility, must necessarily produce power. For the simple reason that under these conditions it could not stop short of action, for that would be the denial of the life, love, and light which it is. Then, because the Spirit is life, love, light, and power, it is also peace. Again, for a very simple reason, that being the spirit of the whole, it cannot set one apart in antagonism against another. For that would be to destroy the wholeness. Next, the Spirit must be beauty, because on the same principle of wholeness, it must duly proportion every part to every other part, and the due proportioning of all parts is beauty. And lastly, the Spirit must be joy, because working on these lines it cannot do otherwise than find pleasure in the self-expression which its works afford it, and in the contemplation of the limitlessness of the creative process by which each realized stage of evolution, however excellent, is still the stepping stone to something yet more excellent, and so on in everlasting progression. For these reasons, we may sum up the substantive being of the all-originating Spirit as life, love, light, power, peace, beauty, and joy, and its active power as that of initiative and selection. These, therefore, constitute the basic laws of the underlying universal mentality which sets the standard of normal personality. A standard which, when seen in this light, transcends the utmost scope of our thought, for it is nothing else than the spirit of the infinite affirmative conceived in human personality. This standard is therefore that of the universal spirit itself, reproduced in human individuality by the same law of reciprocity, which we have found to be the fundamental law of the creative process. Only now we are tracing the action of this law in the fifth kingdom instead of in the fourth. This standard, then, we may call the universal principle of humanity, and having now traced the successive steps by which it is reached from the first cosmic movement of the Spirit in the formation of the primary nebula, we need not go over the old ground again, and may henceforward take this divine principle of humanity as our normal standard and make it the starting point for our further evolution. But how are we to do this? Simply by using the one method of creative process, that is, the self-contemplation of spirit. We now know ourselves to be reciprocals of the divine spirit, centers in which it finds a fresh standpoint for self-contemplation. And so the way to rise to the heights of this great pattern is by contemplating it as the normal standard of our own personality. And be it noted that the pattern thus set before us is universal. It is the embodiment of all the great principles of the affirmative, and so in no way interferes with our own particular individuality. That is something built upon this foundation, something additional affording the differentiating medium through which this unifying principle finds variety of expression. Therefore, we need be under no apprehension lest by resting upon this pattern we should become less ourselves. On the contrary, the recognition of it sets us at liberty to become more fully ourselves, because we know that we are basing our development not upon the strength of our own unaided will, nor yet upon any sort of extraneous help, but upon the universal law itself, manifesting through us in the proper sequence of the creative order. So that we are still dealing with universal principles, only the principle by which we are now working is the universal principle of personality. I wish the student to get this idea very clearly, because this is really the crux of the passage from the fourth kingdom into the fifth. The great problem of the future of evolution is the introduction of the personal factor. The reason why this is so is very simple when we see it. To take a thought from my own Dore lectures, we may put it in this way. In former days, no one thought of building ships of iron because iron does not float. Yet, now ships are seldom built of anything else, though the relative specific gravities of iron and water remain unchanged. What has changed is the personal factor. It has expanded to a more intelligent perception of the law of flotation, and we now see that wood floats and iron sinks, both of them by the same principle working under opposite conditions. The law, namely, that anything will float which bulk for bulk is lighter than the volume of water displaced by it, so that by including in our calculations the displacement of the vessel as well as the specific gravity of the material, we now make iron float by the very same law by which it sinks. This example shows that the function of the personal factor is to analyze the manifestations of law which are spontaneously afforded by nature and to discover the universal affirmative principle which lies hidden within them, and then by the exercise of our powers of initiative and selection to provide such specialized conditions as will enable the universal principle to work in perfectly new ways, transcending anything in our past experience. This is how all progress has been achieved up to the present, and is the way in which all progress must be achieved in the future. Only for the purpose of evolution, or growth from within, we must transfer the method to the spiritual plane. The function, then, of the personal factor in the creative order is to provide specialized conditions by the use of the powers of selection and initiative, a truth indicated by the maxim, nature unaided fails. But the difficulty is that if enhanced powers were attained by the whole population of the world without any common basis for their use, their promiscuous exercise could only result in chaotic confusion and the destruction of the entire race. To introduce the creative power of the individual and at the same time avoid converting it into a devastating flood is the great problem of the transition from the fourth kingdom into the fifth. For this purpose, it becomes necessary to have a standard of the personal factor independent of any individual conceptions, just as we found that in order for us to attain self-consciousness at all, it was a necessity that there should be a universal mind as the generic basis of all individual mentality. Only in regard to the generic build of mind, the conformity is necessarily automatic, while in regard to the specializing process, the fact that the essence of that process is selection and initiative renders it impossible for the conformity to the standard of personality to be automatic. The very nature of the thing makes it a matter of individual choice. Now, a standard of personality independent of individual conceptions must be the essence of personality as distinguished from individual idiosyncrasies, and can therefore be nothing else than the creative life, love, beauty, etc., viewed as a divine individuality, by identifying ourselves with which we eliminate all possibility of conflict with other personalities based on the same fundamental recognition. And the very universality of this standard allows free play to all our particular idiosyncrasies, while at the same time preventing them from antagonizing the fundamental principles to which we have found that the self-contemplation of the originating spirit must necessarily give rise. In this way, we attain a standard of measurement for our own powers. If we recognize no such standard, our development of spiritual powers, our discovery of the immense possibilities hidden in the inner laws of nature and of our own being, can only become a scourge to ourselves and others. And it is for this reason that these secrets are so jealously guarded by those who know them, and that over the entrance to the temple are written the words, Ascato bebeloi, hence ye profane. But if we recognize and accept this standard of measurement, then we need never fear our discovery of hidden powers either in ourselves or in nature, for on this basis it becomes impossible for us to misuse them. Therefore, it is that all systematic teaching on these subjects begins with instruction regarding the creative order of the cosmos, and then proceeds to exhibit the same order as reproduced on the plane of personality, and so affording a fresh starting point for the creative process by the introduction of individual initiative and selection. This is the doctrine of the macrocosm and the microcosm, and the transition from the generic working of the creative spirit in the cosmos to its specific working in the individual is what is meant by the doctrine of the octave. Hadn't heard of the doctrine of the octave, unless he mentioned it before, and it blew right by me. So, I'm finding this pretty interesting. It took a while to get going. The first 10 parts were kind of slow and dragging along, but I really like how he laid out that love, life, and light and power and all of those things, beauty. It was pretty interesting how he kind of inductively came up with those. So at any rate, I believe that is the end of chapter 5, and we'll continue later with chapter 6. Make it a great day, and bye for now.